Howdy, folks. Richard Avery, Titanium Computing, coming to you with another hacker horror story. One of the things that people don't appreciate is that there is a hacker that's the right size for you out there. Are they an advanced hacker with an advanced platform and significant tools that they've developed themselves? Or is it just a script kiddie who doesn't even understand what that script he's running actually does? Is he just running low orbit ion cannon and doing some DOS attacks to take out your infrastructure? Or does he really have some chops and even understand what a port is? These stories happen all over the place. One of the hacker horror stories that I've got is a customer gets targeted and compromised via simple email, business email compromise. It's one of the most common forms of attack. Somebody's sending you a phishing email, you're clicking a phishing link, you get something installed via your browser, or you have a tool installed, a RAT, which is called a remote access tool. There's actually a great video here on YouTube if you search for it called Rats and Slaves. You can check that out over here. It's in German, but there's closed captioning translation, which is valuable. And it talks about the concept of somebody's machine's compromised. That machine's already been turned into a zombie, if we're using botnet terminology, or a slave, and it gets sold on a market. And that market is usually hosted in the dark web. We'll talk about the dark web another time. How you get to it, what it is, how old is it, those kind of things. But the concept of going and buying those resources on the dark web is not uncommon. So this particular hacker horror story is a situation where the network itself had been compromised for months and months. If you search dwell time for an incident or a breach, you see the average dwell time of a security event is anywhere from 100 to 180 days, depending on whose study and what variables are involved. But the truth of it is that if you're compromised, you might be compromised for a long time before the attacker decides to take action. So those machines get put into pools and they are sold out on these brokerage marketplaces of compromised machines based on software that's installed. Oh, hey, you've got QuickBooks installed. You're probably running at least a small business, or you're an accountant or a bookkeeper. You got Lacert installed. I know you're an accountant or a bookkeeper. You go over here. You got Easy Dental, Dentrix, something like that installed. You're a dental professional in some way, shape, or form. You go over here, and so on and so forth. They have a list. They know what software installed tells them what kind of industry you're in, and those get targeted appropriately. So the law firm that I want to talk about that got compromised clicked on some links, and they got some remote access tools installed. They were in a lot of trouble because those attackers had dwelled for so long that they had gotten access to absolutely everything, but nobody had bought them. Nobody had bought access to that network. They didn't have an IT company. They didn't have a cybersecurity professional. They had no one on staff to really manage what was going on. They would get these weird email responses. Occasionally, one of the users actually kept a log of it. She would send an email out and it would come back to her, and it would have anywhere from 1 to 10 Chinese characters in it. If you're building an incident response plan, other languages popping up that you're not expecting should be an incident that should be tagged in your incident response plan. It seems like a really basic thing, but if you don't have somebody helping build this out for you, you wouldn't know. So, what happens when you send an email out and you get a bunch of Chinese characters back? 1 out of 1,000 emails? It can't be that big of a deal, right? Well, the downside is that They had taken over control of everything that this law office had. They took over their GoDaddy, they took over their email, they took over their office environment, they took over their machines. They had access to absolutely everything that this law office had access to. It was a disaster, to the point where they started to have charges on their credit cards that they couldn't account for. They started to have a slowly ballooning license pool of new licenses in their GoDaddy account. They suddenly had new domains that they weren't accessing because they couldn't go access the account. They were now a sub-user in their account, and no one could help them because they didn't have the authority to help them. Only after they had their user, I think it was 4x, they went from like spending $600 a month in Microsoft costs to $2,500 a month in Microsoft costs, did they start to actively go to log into things and find out they couldn't get into anything. And once they started to try and log in and try to scrape some of these things back, that's really when everything started to get locked down even more stringently. When we got called in, by that point in time, nearly everything had been BitLockered, not ransomwared, because they were making money off of this company. This law firm was effectively feeding them PII, feeding them credit card data, feeding them checking account data. They were doing the worst practices they could imagine, or that you could imagine, because they were tossing credit cards around in the raw, in emails. They had all of this infrastructure. The attackers didn't want to ransomware them because they were making money off of them in all sorts of other ways. So they got turned into a cash cow for their core business. Now, the upside there was that their core business never actually got shut down, but they did have these massive problems because they no longer owned any of their infrastructure. They didn't have any of the control of it. And they weren't on an Active Directory server, so they didn't have a single sign-on. Each machine had its own local administrative password, and for some reason, they lost all of those. They didn't have access to any of the administrative passwords. We managed to get them to a new domain, start migrating their data, and start showing proof of ownership of the domain. That can take time, and it did. It took about a month for things to get handed over from a domain standpoint, from one domain account to the other domain account, because they were able to prove, hey, this is us, here's our formation documents. GoDaddy was very helpful in giving all of that information and access back to us as we were trying to detangle these hackers who had gotten into these things. But as soon as we started to take away the hackers' access, they started to get really upset because we were affecting their income stream. That caused them to get locked down a little bit more. Eventually, they had to buy a bunch of machines to swap to while we were sanitizing their old machines. And then eventually, we also had some conversations with them about, hey, if this machine has been compromised at all, maybe you don't want to trust the hardware. And it's totally possible, unlikely, but still possible, that they're lingering in hardware, in the BIOS, in the UEFI, in the drive. By the end, we destroyed all the drives. They donated the laptops and the machines that they had. They did a full tech refresh, and eventually we migrated them fully back on. But that's a horror story about how a company could get so compromised that you have, instead of a hackers trying to lock you down, they've just attached themselves to you like a financial parasite, slowly consuming organizational resources because you have no one actually looking inside at the organization itself. Really sad sometimes, but that law office is still up and running. They still don't have an IT company. After we finished securing them and getting them all cleaned up, they were like, all right, thanks. Hopefully we'll never have to call you again. We were like, you should really have a plan for these things. Like, we should build some sort. Nope, thanks. All right, see ya. So Don't let that happen to you. Get an IT company, get an MSP, get something in place so that you can see visibility about what's happening inside your network. And you can know when people are doing things that you shouldn't be doing. All right. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate you coming to my channel and watching this particular hacker horror story. Please subscribe, like, ring the bell, click on another video, check us out somewhere else. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.